I don't know if I can ever explain what happened that night. It's been years, but I can still feel it in my bones, the fear, the confusion. All I know is that I saw something no one should ever see, and to this day, I regret ever stepping foot into that man's house. It all started with a phone call. My cousin, Ton, had been sick for months, and no doctor could figure out what was wrong. He was losing weight fast, pale, and always complaining of pains no one could explain. Out of options, he reached out to a local man, an occultic doctor they said could heal anything. I was skeptical, of course. I thought it was some kind of joke or a scam. But Ton seemed desperate, and when he begged me to come with him for moral support, I reluctantly agreed. The doctor's house was on the outskirts of the village, far from the main road. It looked like any normal house from the outside, except for the heavy smell of something burning that hit us as soon as we entered. It wasn't incense, more like something decaying, and I remember feeling my stomach turn. The doctor himself was tall, too tall, and wore a long, dark robe. His face was hidden under a hood, but his eyes, I could see them. They were unsettling, too wide and too dark. When he spoke, his voice was deep, unnatural. He said nothing that sounded like the typical doctor's reassurance. Instead, he asked in a cold tone, "What do you seek here?" Ton explained his symptoms, and the man simply nodded, his eyes never leaving us. "I can help," he said. "But first, we must pay the price." I didn't know what he meant, but I soon found out. The doctor led us into a back room, where strange symbols were drawn on the floor with red powder. A large fire burned in the corner, and the air felt thick, heavy. It was clear that this was not a place for healing, but for something darker. He instructed Ton to sit in the center of the symbols. I stayed by the door, watching uneasily. The doctor began chanting in a language I didn't understand, his words growing louder, faster, as if calling something from deep within the earth. The temperature dropped suddenly. I saw Ton shiver, but not from the cold. His eyes rolled back in his head, and his body jerked, as though something inside him was fighting to break free. Then I heard it. A voice, not Ton's, whispering from the shadows. It was a low growl, like something ancient, something evil. The room seemed to spin, and the walls felt like they were closing in. I tried to move, but my feet felt stuck to the ground. I couldn't breathe. The doctor's chanting grew louder, his hands moving in the air like he was controlling the very wind. And then, in the middle of it all, I saw something that I would never forget. From the corner of the room, a dark shape started to form, slowly, like it was taking its time to make itself known. It had no face, just a silhouette, but the air around it felt thick with malice. The doctor smiled, but it wasn't a human smile. It was something else, something terrifying. That's when I knew. This wasn't a doctor. This was a man who dabbled in things no one should ever touch. He wasn't healing Ton, he was feeding something that thrived on pain and fear. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually, the shape disappeared, and Ton collapsed to the ground. The doctor stepped back, watching us with those cold, empty eyes. "You will never forget what you've seen tonight," he said, his voice a whisper, "and you will never speak of it." Ton was different after that. The sickness didn't go away, but he seemed quieter. Like part of him had been taken, and something else had filled the space. I knew he wasn't the same person anymore. I never went back to that house. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that the doctor is still out there, waiting for someone else to make the mistake we did. It wasn't until later that I heard the rumors about the doctor and the sacrifices he made to keep his power. They said he didn't just heal people. He controlled them, used them. And I couldn't help but wonder, maybe Ton wasn't the first. Maybe he wouldn't be the last. I never believed in miracles before, but what happened next still feels like one. After that terrifying night, I couldn't get the events out of my head. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamed of those dark shapes and the doctor's cold, empty eyes. Ton wasn't the same either, his energy was gone, and his once lively spirit felt muted. I couldn't accept that this was how it would end for him. I had to do something. I went to the only person I thought could help, my grandmother. She was a deeply spiritual woman, wise in ways that didn't always make sense to me, but she had seen things, understood things I couldn't. When I told her about the doctor and what had happened, her face grew serious. "This man is not greater than the God who made us," she said firmly. "But you must fight for your cousin." She gave me a list of things to gather, simple things: white chalk, palm oil, and a small jar of holy water blessed by the local priest. She also taught me a prayer, one she said would protect us and break whatever hold the doctor had overturned. That night, I went back to Ton's house. I drew the chalk circle around him as my grandmother instructed, lit a small lamp, and began the prayer. At first, it felt like nothing was happening, and I started to feel foolish. But then, the air in the room shifted. It wasn't cold like before but warm, comforting. It was as if the darkness that had clung to Ton was being pulled away. Ton started to shake, his body riding just like it had in the doctor's house. I panicked, but I kept praying, louder, stronger. The lamp flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw something dark, like a shadow, leaving his body. And just like that, it was over. Ton opened his eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw him, the real him. He smiled weakly and whispered, "Thank you." From that day forward, Ton slowly got better. The weight came back, his energy returned, and the nightmare stopped. We never spoke about the doctor again, but I made a promise to myself I would warn anyone who even thought of going to that man. Looking back, I don't know if it was the prayer, the holy water, or sheer willpower, but I know one thing for sure: light is always stronger than darkness, even in the darkest of places.